So before we start the video, I'd just like to say that I am not an engineer, I am not a physicist. I got my GCSE in physics and then I dropped it. I don't fully understand what I'm talking about at any given point. Don't take what I say at face value. You know, if you want to learn about things, but learn about them from people that know what they're talking about. Learn about them from experts. Learn about them from the people that invented these things. And you can, because it's 2025, we have the internet. I strongly encourage you, if you have questions, just Google them. Just ask them. Because more often than not, people are very happy to answer. That being said, enjoy the video. Alright, hello and welcome. This is actually the second time of me trying to record this intro because I'm stupid and don't know how to use a microphone. Obviously the audio quality isn't going to be great. This is a £15 mic from Amazon that I use for Teams calls. If this sticks around, I might invest in a better one. But please don't worry if you can't hear me. The whole video will be subtitled in. Today we are playing a bit of Oakridge nuclear power station. This is made by, I don't quite know how to pronounce it, Koyot Digital. It's a lovely little simulator of what if Europe built an RBMK reactor. If that doesn't mean anything to you, an RBMK reactor is Russian, I'm not going to try and pronounce it, for a high power channel type reactor. It's the sort that exploded in Chernobyl because of inherent design flaws. I don't know a huge amount in depth about these. Obviously I know the principles. They're not the sort of reactor that I'm hugely interested in, but this game is very fun. So that's what we're doing today. So you have to set a shift length. That's just to tell you how long you have to make a certain amount of power. Today we're playing as our good old friend Anton. You will see over time that I have certain characters that appear over and over again. Because I'm boring. I'm just going to drive into work. You will soon see that there's a reason why they took my driver's license off me. No, I'm kidding. It was for medical reasons. But I get to make jokes about it. So this here is Hugh, I believe. It's Hugh. Hugh is a little bit odd. He's a security guy. I quite like Hugh. Oh god, we should try and avoid blowing up Hugh. I've kind of got to the point on this game where I'm able to avert most meltdowns before they happen. Most. That's very important. But actually sinking the reactor to the grid and sending out power, well, it's easier said than done. So we're just going to head into the main building. I will show you a couple of things in the lobby, and then I will change into some clothes more suited for indoors. So this game is intensely detailed, like intensely detailed. You can play as a security officer. They have their own separate I believe this is the guy that created it. Thanks, Goober Johnson. Your game is cool. These are the different ranks in the station. Power station. As you can see in the top corner here, there's points. Those points tick up when you're on shift. I will talk a little bit more about that later. It used to be the case that it was 5,000 to be a trainee, I believe. Now it's 10,000, which means I'm still technically a visitor, and they're letting me run the nuclear power plant. But there you have it. We're just gonna change into some better clothes for today. I will be back. Okay, here we are in our indoor clothes. It's not appropriate to show up to work in an area that's mostly sterile in a giant coat. Tuck ourselves in, get stuck in the turnstile, as is ritual. We're going to take the stairs on the way down. There's no need to wait for the lift when it's just one flight of stairs. Well, 4 flights of stairs. There was a time in my life when I couldn't do 4 flights of stairs. I couldn't even do 1. Thankfully I'm not claustrophobic. So we're just going to get changed into some PPE. Hard hat and a site uniform. When I visited a nuclear reactor, they had us wearing hard hats, ear defenders, and oddly enough gloves, because there was climbing, and they wanted us to be wearing those slightly gripped gloves. So here we have our dosimeter. In this game we tap the dosimeter to enter the actual working plant parts. That's what makes our points go up. So you actually have to be on the job, no slacking. So these coloured lines on the walls are how you navigate. Off the top of my head, I believe green is the control room. Let's have a look. Yes. Red will take you to the reactor core, that sort of thing. The reactor core is quite a long walk. If you're so inclined, you can go and have a look at it, but there's not actually much there to see. And obviously you have to wear a full-on radiation suit and carry a Geiger counter. It's a lot of effort, let's just say that. So we're heading up to the control room now. There are a few offices in here. And most importantly, this is our office. Shift manager's office. As you can see, this is the control room. This is loosely modelled off a Soviet RBMK reactor. As you can see, there's the rods displayed there. There's a central console there. Over this side, you get all the water switches and such. Over that side, there's all the inlets and outlets. I will show you. And here, there's the electricity breaker set. Let's have some coffee before we start. There's this sort of wide misconception that you see that nuclear power is unsafe. Nuclear power is very safe. The reason why Chernobyl exploded was less to do with the actual reactor itself and more to do with the sort of systemic failures of the Soviet Union. When it comes to safety, it's important that everyone feels like they can speak up, because you might have noticed something that someone else hasn't. Environments where you feel like you can't speak up, that's where the problems happen. The aviation industry is a really good example of this, in that they have a sort of very horizontal safety structure, and that you can challenge anyone around you, but obviously things still go wrong. There's very few bits of technology where the technology is at fault. Usually it's the humans at fault. The aviation industry, the car industry, I'm trying to think, the escalator industry is very, very safe as well. Lifts, trains, all of these, well, they have a safety record written in blood, essentially, as you make changes based on the fact that something terrible has happened. You change it so it can't happen again. It's supposed to be the same idea in healthcare as well. That's the industry that I have most direct experience with. I don't know if that's true or not. There are certain changes that have come about because of nasty incidents for example, on syringes that you use to give someone liquid feed through a nasogastric tube. So that's a tube that goes through their nose, down their throat, into their stomach. So if someone can't swallow, we can feed them that way. The syringes that you use for that are no longer compatible with like intravenous lines, because there were incidents where the two got confused and people did die. So safety is often written in blood. Unfortunately, that's how these things tend to go. Same with nuclear power, but in actual fact, the accidents that you think of when you think of nuclear power are the big ones. Fukushima is another one that people think of. But Fukushima was caused by a tsunami. They never built for that. But now, of course, they have. Even the Soviets, when they kept on using the RBMK reactor after Chernobyl, they changed the design. They changed the design, they changed the operating procedures so that it wouldn't happen again. Admittedly, the RBMK is not my favourite sort of reactor. The one that I have almost a romantic affair with is a European pressurised water reactor. So I'm not as hugely familiar with this one, but obviously a lot of people are to some degree familiar, purely because of the Chernobyl accident. Should pick up a bypass key. This lets us turn off certain things that we wouldn't otherwise be able to, which may be a good or bad thing depending on your perspective. So yeah, this is the control room. I'm going to leave you in the hands of future me / past me to give you a quick rundown on exactly how a nuclear reactor works. If you're not interested, I will leave the timestamp somewhere for you to skip that. And we'll be right back here in a bit. See you later. Okay, so I've tried to record this a few times, as is a common thing with me, and I talk for too long, so I've pre-drawn a lot of things here. So this is the basics of nuclear power. I think it's important for you to have an idea before we start. So I will go through why nuclear power works very quickly, but at the same time we don't really need to get too far into the physics of it. When it comes to nuclear power, you have control rods, which are radioactive. When you put a bunch of radioactive stuff in the same place, it reaches criticality, which means it starts spitting out neutrons which hit other atoms of radioactive stuff and it breaks them down. That's what the fission bit is, as opposed to fusion. Fission is breaking down. It breaks down the atoms into lighter elements and more neutrons. So it becomes a self-sustaining reaction. We control these with control rods which absorb the neutrons. That will become important later. When it comes to nuclear reactors, obviously, if things explode, people get hurt, they get killed, and a lot of that is PR damage, essentially. When you have an incident like Chernobyl, that really sort of irrevocably damaged this entire industry, because that's all people think of, when actually it's not strictly true. So we've got three things to look at today. We've got the pressurised water reactors. I'll finish off with the RBMK before we go back to the games. You have an idea of why it works the way it does. But first let's have a little look at the MacLeod reactors. Nobody cares about them. They are mostly deprecated now. I believe there's a few still running. The very first in the UK was in Sellafield. Essentially they realised that when you want to break down uranium into weapons-grade plutonium, you stick it all in the pile and you wait. Because as the half-life goes on, it splits off into plutonium. it was the Cold War, they wanted the weapons-grade plutonium for bombs, but they realised that actually it produced a lot of heat, so they thought, okay, and they made it into a nuclear reactor. So here you have the main building. The main reactor building is here. Notice there's no large dome on it or anything like that. That's because the MacLeod was deemed not to need one, because it's a simple design, it's gas cooled. The reason why Chernobyl exploded was because the water in the reactor turned into gas. So the gas turned into steam and it blew the top off the reactor. That's why the majority of nuclear reactors these days are incredibly safe, because they use coolant that can't turn into gas like that. MacLeod reactors also aren't particularly volatile in terms of how much power they produce, so they didn't think they needed a second containment, because in those days they worked on this idea of safety proofing against the largest possible accident, the largest and most likely accident. So the MacLeod reactor wasn't really intended to produce power in the first place, but as time went on, they thought, why not? Let's make more power out of our plutonium. This you see here, this is the spent fuel pool, and that's the handling chrome. When it comes to more modern nuclear reactors, here you have a little diagram of a pressurized water reactor. So the reason why pressurized water reactors are cool is because, again, we learn from our mistakes. This is the reactor vessel. You have the control rods in the top, the fuel rods are in there. This is the hot loop, so cool because it's the one that gets hot. The pressurizer makes the water under so much pressure that it's not possible for it to boil off. Again, that prevents the steam accidents. So the water goes into the reactor chamber, it gets heated up by the heat energy that's thrown off when the fissile reaction takes place. So we get the neutrons, which go on to make more of the fissile reaction, we get the lighter elements that are split off, and we get heat. That heat energy is the most important thing when it comes to generating power. Every sort of power in humanity's history uses heat in some way. It uses heat or it uses rotational force, but the way most power stations do it is heat. Apart from like a wind turbine, which just provides direct rotational force. So what happens is the hot loop goes around, it's under so much pressure it cannot boil off, it just turns into really, really hot water. And then that passes what's called the steam generator. So it passes through the cold loop. The heat from the hot loop turns the water in the cold loop into steam. That steam then goes round and it drives the turbine. That turbine drives the generator, which through electromagnetism makes electricity. Everyone in the city is now happy. I've actually been very lucky and laid on one of these. It was so big that you could almost lay back on it and put your back against it, and it was slightly warm. So what happens then is the steam goes through to the condenser. So sometimes you'll see those massive towers. Those are part of the condenser. Is that the hot water goes in, evaporates, comes down, rolls down, and you get water at the bottom. The way that the Sizewell power station works is that it actually uses the sea. The sea is very cold because the sea is very large. So it runs the water through a huge intake of seawater and it cools it down. It doesn't affect the fish. The fish get thrown back into the sea through a fish return. I kid you not, that's what it's called. It doesn't affect the temperature of the water. The water temperature variation is between no more than 1 degree. Compared to down at the next beach, they're very, very strict on that for obvious reasons. So that condenser then turns the steam back into water with this loop of cold water running through it. That water that's just come from the steam goes through what's called the feed water pumps. That's here, because that's feeding water into the cold loop. These come round back into the steam generator. So you get this loop. Notice how anything that's come into the reactor contact with the fuel rods, that never leaves. That doesn't come out. You are never exposed to anything that's been directly exposed to the fuel rods. So the fish are happy. The people are happy because they're getting power. And the terrorists are sad. In the UK, we've always had a bit of a problem with terrorism. When Sizewell was being built, that was even more of a problem. And a lot of accidents that have happened have been because of a failure of this outer structure here. This is the secondary containment. The actual reactor itself is within like a huge metal cylinder. So that's the primary containment. This outer egg, this is the secondary. If this internal one was to explode, then it wouldn't be able to get anything out of here because it's gas proof. You wouldn't have that release of radioisotopes into the atmosphere. Nothing's getting out. The other thing is the reason why the terrorist is sad is because you could fly a plane into this thing and it would be fine. You know, they did demonstrations of it where they flew a drone into it. Nothing. It's these huge concrete panels that are run through with like giant rebar, and someone went over every inch of it with an X-ray to make sure there's no hidden cracks. It is near impenetrable. You can see there, that's the Magnox reactor in the background. This is where they're preparing the control room and such, and this building here is the turbines, and you can see here, this is where the intakes are. That's the intake for the Magnox that's still there out in the sea. And yes, I did just borrow this stock image from the thing. You can see this is massively simplified. That's the actual primary reactor vessel. That's a little bit beyond my pay grade. So this is an RBMK reactor. This is the one that did the bad at Chernobyl. So it had a number of design flaws. I'm not going to go through the like culture issues that allowed the design flaws to perpetuate, because that would involve like going into the history of the Soviet Union, and that's kind of beyond the scope of this video. So the first thing you need to notice is that it's got no containment. It's got no like big egg. It has the primary reactor vessel, that's this, but if that blows open, there's nothing to stop it. So one of the first problems that they had is that when the fuel rods got hot, it boiled the water. So that's the reason why the pressurized water reactor, that keeps the water under such high pressure that it cannot boil. And the Magnox up there uses coolant that's already gas, so there's nothing more for it to boil into. When the water boiled, if the reactor rods got too hot, you would hope that the water would absorb some of the neutrons and slow the reaction down, because water is what's known as a moderator, meaning it slows the reaction down slightly. Unfortunately, because the water was directly exposed to the rods and it wasn't under pressure, it wasn't heavy water, there wasn't anything to stop it from boiling. When you stick pasta on a stove or whatever, you see the bubbles. That was exactly what was happening here. So these bubbles weren't actually doing anything to stop the reaction. In fact, they were encouraging more neutrons to go flying around, which meant the reaction increased. I say this is the disaster line here. So they were running the reactor at very low power. They noticed that it started to go up further than they wanted to. They had all the rods pulled out because they were trying to rush a test, as far as I know. Again, I haven't gone too much into the psychology part of this. So when they noticed that things were starting to get out of control, they put in the control rods. The control rods usually are made out of boron carbide. It's because boron carbide, it absorbs the neutrons. The only problem is that the control rods here were tipped with graphite. So they'd originally envisioned it that if your control rods were down here, there'd be a little bit of water. So you'd be pushing the water out of the way to move the control rods down. But because they had nearly all the control rods out and they put them nearly all down at the same time when they hit the emergency stop, it shoved all this water out, this already boiling water, which made everything worse. Because without the water, the reaction gets a little bit more out of control. So this is disaster. The next problem is that it got so hot in the reactor that the channels that everything was within began to distort. So these control rods were coming down very slowly because there was nothing they could do at that point. They were just trying to shovel the control rods, stop the reaction. But the fuel rods were all broken. The control rod channels were all broken. And they couldn't put them in all the way. And that was it. All of those factors at the same time, within maybe 30 seconds of each other. That was it. You were fine and then they were not fine. So all the steam voids, the graphite tips, the reactor reached a criticality incident where it was no longer under control. People have this misconception that it was the reactor that exploded. It was not. It was the gas in the reactor. Everything boiled off at once. It was so hot. This sealed vessel blew apart. And that threw radioactive stuff all over the place. The fuel rods were so hot that they were burning through the ground. That's what the elephant's foot is if you've never seen it. It's a melted piece of debris. They were melting through the ground, they were burning, and it was throwing off radioactive smoke, it was throwing off ash. That's what made it so bad, is that it was a combination of all these factors, and also that nobody felt confident enough to say anything. But obviously, since then, we've made changes to the way reactors work, we've made changes to the moderators, we've made changes to the containment building. So these factors don't happen anymore. There is no way for that to happen again, because we know why it happened, we know why it was possible, and we've removed that factor. Oh, you're back. You were gone for a long time. Well, I hope you learned something. Let's get started. So, here we have the pre-start checklist. It's 2 pages long, roughly. So, the condenser coolant pumps. I'm hoping that my past/future self will have taught you what those were. But if not, don't worry. We'll set them to speed 2. Done. We need to open the turbine A, B bleed valve. That's this one here. As you can see, turbine A, turbine B. Bleed valve is between the two. So they connect. That's all that does. So now we're going to enable the bypass valve, turbine A. And we're going to set it to 100%. Just means we're not using it right now. Now hang on, I've set the auto bypass, so we just need to set that manually. And see how that little thing up there is increasing. Here we go. Okay, so the de-aerator takes the air out of the water. This isn't present in the pressurized water reactor, but it is in our BMK. We're going to set the relief valve to 50 and the steam inlet to 25. We may be here some time. At the moment that means we're bringing in less steam than we're letting out. This is all just when we're setting up the reactor. It does change. Unfortunately, it's not the most simple of processes, but then again it feels like it shouldn't be. When things get going, we'll set these onto auto. This button here. Let's see. Closed, that one. Automatic feed limiter valve. Just turn the circulation pump on first. That's this one. A2. On speed 2. A1. And now we're going to de-isolate the reactor. That means we're bringing water into the inner chamber. This here is the emergency core cooling system. Just means that we can fill the reactor with cold water if we need to. It's important that we fill this. We will potentially need that quite urgently later on. All that means is that we can pump a whole bunch of cold into the reactor if it gets too hot. It does have a particularly loud alarm. It can backflow into itself if the reactor is far too full. I've never gotten to that point. I'd like to not get to that point. So the ECSS is full to above 1,500 psi. We're now going to set the hot well. 35. We should turn that on auto. Automatic. I'm going to prime the offload. Turn it off auto. Some of the automatic systems in here are very sensitive, so I like to turn them off. That's primed. See that there? We just hit that in emergency. Off. So breaker 64 BM. Enabled. 18 MG1. This one needs a key. I must have left that over here. Just going to pick that up. Put that in there. Splendid. So that's on. Let's set the condensed coolant pumps. Where are they at? Oh, I already set them. Splendid. I'm just going to hope that I remember to enable that. That is the reactor startup done. Okay, now the reactor is in a state in which we can start it up. This is where things get a little bit more sketchy, but I'm sure it's be fun. Though the first thing I'm going to do is disable the auto spam. So we'll see. That alarm is just telling us that it's been disabled. It's nothing to worry about. We are now going to enable Reactor Mode 1, where 0 is off, 1 is startup, and 2 is operational. Again, more alarms. That's just telling us that the mode that the reactor is set in is not the same as what we've got going on the panels. So we're going to sort that out now. We will close heat exchanger 1 and 2. This is the water that cools the reactor core when it's not being used. We don't need that anymore. We're about to start heating it up. OCC stands for offline core cooling. I turn those off. Now if we hit acknowledge and then reset, we're still in a mode conflict as of right now because the offline core rods are still in. These are the rods that stop the core from misbehaving when it's off. So let's turn them off. Now you can see that they are withdrawing. That's these ones, the ones that are flashing. Notice how on this all the rods are being withdrawn in a symmetrical pattern. That's important because this should be even. If we get hotspots in the reactor, that's going to cause problems. Because of the reasons that I talked about earlier with the steam, we need to keep everything about the same temperature, so everything is about the same in terms of makeup of water and steam. It just helps. So we're going to have to wait for those to withdraw. See how now the mode conflict is flashing? That means that the alarm is resolved. So all we'll have to do later is go and hit the reset button. And that should be removed because now we've turned off the shutdown control rods and the offline core cooling is off. So we are no longer in a mode in which the reactor is shut down. That bell there is telling us that the shutdown control rods have withdrawn. So now we're going to enable the auto control rods. This is another set of control rods. On this panel you see the blue ones refer to the offline ones and the red ones refer to the auto ones. The auto ones will withdraw until we get to our desired power. However, you see now they are withdrawing. We're not making any power yet. So what we've pulled out so far isn't enough, which means we're going to now have to do some of the work ourselves. Bearing in mind things need to be symmetrical, we will start pulling out rods. See how parts of this light up? That tells us what sections of the core we've pulled rods out of. So I'm going to aim to try and do an outer layer. I don't know if that's going to work, but we'll see. We'll just start withdrawing the rods. This is where we're beginning to have more neutrons bouncing around in the core, which will make it heat up a bit more. We're still going for it. This takes a little bit of time. Bearing in mind that you also have to balance out the fact that if you pull control rods out, the core heat balance will change, and that's not really something we want. The other thing we have to mind is the reactor water level. If we keep it too low, the reactor runs dry. That's a problem. If we keep it too high, the reactor fills up with water. That's also a problem. The problem is that once the reactor gets hot, water begins to boil off. So we should keep an eye on that. And you will see that I have a fundamental skill issue in doing so. So you're going to ask me, why don't I pull out all the rods at once? well, it's a design flaw. You can only pull out 12 at a time. So you can't just go ahead and pull them out in very large chunks. I like to keep it in smaller chunks. I'm saying this like every single time when I try to do this. It doesn't end in disaster or lack of power or the engineer getting on my nerves. The most common way for this to end for me is a breaker trips and the engineer can't turn it back on and we run out of feed water. And in that case there's no other option but to shut the reactor down. So unfortunately in the fictional land where this is, they're not getting that much power. So we're just withdrawing control rods until we start to see power. There we go. We're aiming for 1,500 watts. I'm going off of this written on my other screen, so I don't have to keep blinding you with the clipboard. Once we're at 1,500 watts, we'll be able to switch into operating mode, and then we'll have to start up the feed water and condensate pumps. So that's the water that we're pulling into the condensators to cool down the hot loop, to cool down the cold loop back into cold water again. I have no idea where we get that water from. I'm not even sure there is a river in this game, but I'm kind of hoping there is, otherwise we may have some problems. So a difficult part of this is actually keeping track of which you've already pulled out and which you haven't. Because obviously on the control rod display it does show you with the white light, but it's not that obvious. The two blue lights indicate it's moving and the white light indicates it's selected. The green light says it's full in and the red light says it's full out, but obviously that's not easy to see. So we're just pulling out the rods until we get to 1,500. Keeping an eye on the heat distribution. We're starting to see some problems there, which I will rectify shortly. I may set off an alarm before I do that, but I'm sure it'll be fine. Notice how I pulled more rods out the centre, so the centre is hotter. Splendid. Let's deselect those and let's sort out the edges. We're getting there in terms of power. We are getting there. Slowly but surely. Hopefully this slot should be enough. It's a bit annoying because I prefer to keep the reactor colder rather than hotter. But at the same time, if it's too cold, you flood it. So either way you do it causes problems. Obviously real reactors are a lot more stable than this. This is just a game. And in games it's funny when things explode. Though I do believe that in the past it was actually a visible explosion. Now it's not. They had to remove that because Roblox changed their terms of service. So you can't have explosions anymore. Explosions are banned. I mean, explosions that mimic real life, and obviously this does, to an extent, mimic real life. Where are we at? Almost. There we go, 1,500. So now we're going to go ahead and enable the feed water pumps. So feed water pump 1, we'll set it to speed 2, and the condensate pumps, which are over here, pump 1, pump 2. So we're going to have to keep withdrawing rods just until we reach 2100, which is when we can start the run up for the turbines. I'm expecting alarms to start going off soon. That's the way it usually goes, but I guess we'll see. So the outside is still a little bit cooler than the inside, so I'm going to withdraw the first set of rods that I withdraw from the outside, just to see if we can sort of, what now? So something is beeping. Cool water high, okay. So to deal with that, we just need to open our drain. Let's have a look. So that's still rising. That's problematic. Let's just turn that off for now. So the core water is still quite high. I've tripped out the pump, so let's call the engineer and ask him to turn that back on. Unfortunately, part of the problem here is that the engineer has a fundamental skill issue and can't do his job. Carson here, do you need anything? No? Okay, bye. Alright, did I accidentally call security? I did. Thanks, Carson, very cool. Just going to go ahead and close one circulation drain, so while I'm trying to sort out the pumps, we don't absolutely and completely dry the reactor out. We don't want to expose the core to the open air, so we do have to be mindful of the water level. Let's call the engineer and see if he can turn that breaker back on. Looks like he can, because the alarm's now flashing. So the feed pump tripped off, the core water isn't high anymore, the feed loop is dry. We're just going to let it dry out a little bit more. Let's see if that helps. Okay, so he still has a fundamental skill issue. The feed loop is no longer dry. Let's acknowledge that, let's master reset that. The feed loop is no longer dry because the pump has come back online. So let's just turn that on to, just leave that off for now actually. I'm not about that life. So we're still producing 1500 watts. That's not ideal, but let's pull out some more rods and see what happens. Keep half an eye on the water that's coming into and out of the reactor. There's no easy way to see that from this side. This would obviously be much easier in a team. I'm just going to go ahead and close the circulation drain so we're no longer draining water out of the reactor. We'll keep pulling fuel rods out. If the reactor runs dry, we'll just open up the fuel rods, open up the circulation pumps a little bit more. If we have too little water, we'll run the feed water pumps a little bit higher. And if we're still having problems, we've always got the ECCS. So what's that all about? Cool water high. Splendid. So let me just, how bad is it? Okay, that's quite bad. Let's open one of these. That's fine. Master reset. Any critical actions are marked in there on red. I'm just going to shut off the feed water pumps as well real quick. circulation pumps. Let's not do that. It's kind of a consistent problem that there's too much water in the reactor. So that is telling me that the feed loop is dry. We know. I'm not sure I like how much water's in that in the reactor thing right now. I'm not that enthused. But we are doing okay. Even though the circ drain is open, it's still not decreasing, so I'm inclined to leave it and go back to pulling rods up. Our target here is still 1,200, that's what we're still aiming for. We like to see our core heat distribution all the same colour. That's good, we like that. Notice how the auto control rods are now moving of their own accord, that's the red one. They help to try and equalise it, so what we can do is we can increase the number that they're aiming for a little bit more. We can't go up larger than 200 megawatts, so we'll go up to 1,800. And they should withdraw a little bit once if the power drops below. So we're heading towards where we want to be. Slowly but surely. I'm not seeing anything unpleasant. So let's go ahead and ask the engineers to disengage the gears for turbine A. This lets us turn it with our steam. Keep an eye on that power. We're about to breach the 2,100. So I'm quite happy with that. Turbine A, disengage. So that's a mode conflict alarm, this one over here. That's telling us we've reached the threshold for operation. So we're going to go ahead and switch to mode 2. That alarm has now resolved, so we'll just master reset. So now we're going to try the turbine A run up. This is where things usually go horrifically wrong for me. So let's turn the synchronous scope on. Reduce the turbine A valve to about... Sorry, that's the wrong one. We're going to reduce the bypass valve to about 20-30%. So we're now allowing steam into the turbine. And now we're increasing the actual steam that's going into the turbine, about 60-70%. Notice how the RPM is going up. That's telling us the deaerated water is low. We fix that by increasing the condensate pump, so I'll just do that now. Where did I put the condensate pumps? Where are they at? There we go. Nope. There we go. We'll just bring the first one online to speed 1 and see if that resolves the problem. My aim today is just to get a sync to the grid. That'll be fun. 1,800 is our target RPM. And then we should be able to sync to the grid. 1,000. So once the needle slows down and we're waiting for it to be about 1,800, wait for the green light to light up and then hit grid sync. That doesn't sound too good. Oh lord. So I need to just acknowledge all of these. Let's see. We tripped the feed pump 1, so let's turn the feed pump 2 on. Let's just close the circulation drains for now, because if we're not getting water in, we're not getting water in. So let's just turn feed water 1 on for now. It seems to have resolved itself. So I am hoping that, yeah, okay. So let's see what we can do about the aerator temperatures. We need to increase the steam inlet valve. I will likely turn that onto auto. That's this big thing here. Numbers should start changing on their own. That should handle that. Just merge that. I'm not exactly sure how much power we're producing right now. I'm going to assume not that much. Okay, so the sync was successful. What we're going to do now is we're going to increase the turbine valve slowly to 100. What now? Okay, whatever. Cool water is low. So we're just going to acknowledge that, and we're just going to increase these again. Because I'm not a huge fan of exploding. The core water is still going down. Let's just turn that on. I'm not sure where we're losing water from the core, but it is now increasing. I'm fine with this. This is doable. Shut up. So yeah, we're still having problems in terms of feed water. So I will be turning all these on. We also need to turn the condensate pumps on to the same level, so let's just turn those all full on. Maybe that we end up with water too high in the reactor, but that's fine. That's not that much of an issue. We can just drain it. Just telling us the core water is low. We're very aware. Okay. The water is still dropping. So that's problematic. I'm not a huge fan of that. Just call engineering and see if he can turn the breaker back on. I'm not entirely sure why we tripped it. We have insufficient feed, so I really actually need that breaker back on. If the core water drops even further, we're going to be having a situation that I don't really want to be in. Please tell me you got them back on. I don't like you. Okay. So let's see if we can just sync up to the grid, and then if we die it's funny. The reactor water is still a little bit questionable. I don't like the noise of whatever that is. Low hot well level. Okay, that's fine. Let's turn it up to maybe 50. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure what a hot well is or what it does. And we're starting to see a little bit of heat imbalance in the core. Okay. You can see how this kind of rapidly gets out of control. Oh, that's very high. Not a huge fan of that one. Not a huge fan of that one. Not a huge fan of that one. Just turn those off real quick. Okay. Again, it's okay. It's coming down. It's coming down. So the problem is when you hit, things start to trip, and the engineer has the mental capacity of a small potato, which makes things difficult. So we haven't actually managed to sink to the grid yet, because every time I try and do it, we explode. So I'm just going to keep increasing the turbine valve here to 100%. That's the wrong turbine. What is beeping? Insufficient feed. That's fine. Still one of those on. When it comes to pump cavitation, I am not entirely sure how to deal with that. All it means is the pumps are pulling too fast for the things, for the amount of water that's in them. So I wonder if turning the condensate pumps off might help us in that regard, because we're only running one feed water through right now. So, back to what I was doing. So we need to very slowly increase that, as you just saw. It seems to be quite sensitive, which I'm not really a fan of, but you know, what can we do? Whatever that is, I don't like it. Pour water low. That's okay, not a problem. We'll just turn the... This is getting quite hard to... Okay, that's fine. How bad is it? Oh, it's still falling. I worry that we're going to run out of water to be putting into this, because the engineer is not capable of resetting a breaker, but that's his decision. It's not my problem, I fear. So we're just gonna slowly increase. What can possibly be occurring now? Insufficient feed. Oh my gosh. I'd never have guessed. Okay. Let's close that for now. So we're doing in terms of water in the core. So I'm not a huge fan of the way that water is trending. I'm gonna call the engineer and see if he's got his stuff together. I'm gonna guess he hasn't. This is a kind of consistent problem. I have no idea if it's a bug or what. If it could be a bug, it could be a skill issue. He does not reset the breakers. He just does not reset the breakers. Still trending down on that. I don't like that. But the core water is... We're trending up again. So that's fine. I can cope with that. A little bit concerned that our ECCS is no longer filling. Because So that means we need to increase the condensate pumps. That's fine. If you couldn't tell from the way I'm like fumbling about, the directional sound on this is, it's not real. Oh god. Okay. So we're now running on one pump, so that's not my favourite. On the bright side, the reactor's relatively cold, so at least we're not gonna blow up. So we should go back to slowly increasing the flow on this. Watch that it doesn't dip into red too much. It seems to be behaving. I take it back, it's not behaving. I just feel we'll be here all day if we do it that slowly. What is beeping at me now? Okay, that appears to just be telling me that that's resolved. So that's fine. I really wish it didn't alarm to tell me that it's not a problem. Like, you can see why that's annoying. Imagine someone coming to scream at you that there isn't a problem. So, temperature in the deaerator is low. We need to increase the steam in that valve. Unfortunately, I think they're all on 100%. So maybe we decrease the release valve. No, okay. Let's just focus on getting some power into the grid. That's the intelligent thing that I have to offer today. I'm not sure I like that. Let's increase that bypass a little bit. Yeah, okay, I'm sorting it. Oh my god. So everything is going wrong at once. That's fine. They're welcome to go wrong if it all wants to go wrong. So the core water being low is a small emergency. I'm going to open the ECCS. If this is unrecoverable, which it may be. The ECCS is not filling anymore, which does present a problem. Okay, I'm not liking that. I'm not liking that at all. See if all our feed water pumps are on full. It is. I'm not liking that at all. So let's have enough of that. I've hit the shutdown button, and I believe I've hit it before we were in trouble. So all the reactor rods are going back in. The reactor core is cooling down. And we have avoided a crisis, though potentially at the cost of every turbine and every breaker in this place. So that may be it for today. I have a sneaking suspicion they're going to fire me So, what did we actually learn from all of this? I think the most important thing that we learned is that the reason why reactors nowadays are so safe is because they looked at what had gone wrong in the past. And rather than just telling people not to do it again, it was engineered out. And I feel like that's an important thing that gets forgotten in a lot of other industries. Because the nuclear power industry had its Chernobyls, it had its Fukushimas, they made the front pages always. It can't afford to make errors. And there are other fields in which you can't afford to make errors. Surgeons, they can't afford to make errors, but they do. Because it doesn't make the front page news. There's no incentive almost for them to be improving, to be constantly trying to get ahead of errors before they happen. And admittedly in hospitals there is risk management, there is a lot of it, but a lot of it doesn't work in the same way. When it comes to nuclear reactors, the problems are actively engineered out. They are made impossible. And there's some things that have happened and have been made impossible. You can't accidentally connect an NG line syringe to an IV line. A lot of different types of arterial lines that runs into an artery that you can't give medication by. The syringes won't fit together. Some medications have 3 or 4 layers of packaging saying don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. But all of these safety layers, a lot of them rely on the person. But in a nuclear reactor, it has been so long of trying to get ahead of these things. It has been so long of engineering around the person, because in the end, the person is the weak link. We are the weak link in our own technology. Humans are always going to do stupid stuff. We're always going to miss things. We're always going to overlook things. We're always going to misunderstand things. And people are always going to try and sabotage things. That's just the way that it is. But it is a very, very unique field in the fact that these things are predicted and they are engineered out before they happen. And I think we could take something from that to apply to the rest of the way we exist in the world. And that is when we have systems of government that don't work, we don't engineer out. We don't engineer out the parts of them that are corrupt. We don't engineer out the possibility of them being corrupt. We don't engineer out the fact that the laws aren't fair. We don't engineer out the fact that the laws can be misused. I live in the UK. We have problems with the government deliberately misinterpreting laws to arrest people for writing things on pieces of paper, for making tweets. That's not what they're there for. But we have no interest as a society of engineering out these interpersonal problems in the same way as we do when it comes to engineering, when it comes to technology. And I don't know, maybe we should. That's all from me tonight. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I think I'll see you again next time. Good night.